What's up, and welcome to Clarity for Parents of Athletes, bringing you stories from professional athletes about their parents and how they were raised. My name is Gabe from aclearmind.com. All right, and welcome to episode number 36. Now, I hope you enjoyed the last episode with the head coach of the men's soccer team at Georgetown University. That's Brian Weiss. And of course, as I try my best, I have some more exciting guests coming up as well. And of course, in this episode. But before I get to that, I want to thank you, as always, for listening and ask that you rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, as well as subscribe to it and share it with others so that they can listen to these stories from these phenomenal athletes and coaches. You know, the podcast is, of course, designed to help parents who are raising athletes to listen to the histories of these athletes and to see what their parents did to help them on their journeys. And of course, this is all designed really to trickle down to the children so that they can benefit and that they can reach more of their potential as athletes. So the more you share with people, the more children can benefit from it. So I appreciate that. Now remember, you can always join the group that I have on Facebook, the Clarity for Parents of Athletes group. Just search and request to join the group and I'll approve you and connect you with like-minded parents and read some insightful articles and just connect with people who have a lot in common with you. Now, onto this episode, which is with Timy Fairfield, who was a professional athlete in a very unique sport, which is rock climbing. And he played some traditional sports just like many of us did as a youth, but he was drawn to the different events in rock climbing and had an amazing career. He's climbed all over the world and spent 5 consecutive seasons ranked in the top 10 of the World Cup Bouldering ranking. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with rock climbing, it has 3 events, and he's the only U.S. climber to have won professional level international competitions in each of those 3 disciplines of the sport. And if you haven't watched any videos of speed climbing, I really suggest you look some up, and you can see the incredible level of athleticism on the climbers. It's just absolutely unreal what these people are doing. In this interview, Timy talks also about what mentality shift he went through that helped take his performance to another level. And I also decided to split this up into 2 parts. Both parts are full of amazing insights, which will no doubt benefit anyone, let alone parents of athletes. All right, enjoy. All right, Timy Fairfield, thanks for being here today. I just want to let you know I'm known as a guy who likes to make puns in my family, so I want to ask you, as a professional rock climber, how's it hanging?
It's hanging profoundly and dangerously.
Nice. So we're recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic. And just wanted to see what your experience has been like before we get going on your background of your sporting history and family history and all that. How have you been?
I've been well. Unfortunately, my wife, Brandy Prophet, and I were both sick for 3.5 weeks before the stay-home orders were put in place, and we'd already been kind of self-quarantined. And so we're going on 7 weeks of this.
Wow.
As far as social isolation and distancing. So we're kind of used to it. Hopefully we didn't have coronavirus, but if we did, now we're stronger for it. We've been hanging out at our second home in Royal Hondo, New Mexico, which is about 15 minutes north of Taos, New Mexico, near the Colorado border. And it's very low population, so it's easy to isolate, and it's easy to run around outside and break a couple rules without getting caught, I would say. But we haven't really been rock climbing with our friends or with groups, because I would say that rock climbing is one of the worst activities you could do during this time, because you have a high concentration of people congregating in either artificial climbing wall environments indoors with airborne dust particles that carry viruses and infections that you're inhaling, and that's from the chalk, or everybody is touching every surface, thousands of holds. So it's absolutely the worst sport right now to be practicing in a group.
Well, good. I hope you're getting away in nature up there, and it sounds like you're able to isolate from a lot of people. So that's good to hear. So you've heard some of the episodes on my podcast, so you know kind of the routine. And I want to get going on your family history, where you grew up, what kind of sports you played when you were younger, and I'll let you take it away.
I love what you're doing, first of all, because I think a lot of these things have been going on subconsciously inside of our athletes and their parents for a long time, and trying to figure these things out and struggling with these issues. And these issues I've definitely encountered throughout my own athletic career, as well as through helping other athletes, whether it be mentoring them, training them privately, or offering performance training camps for youth competition climbing teams nationwide. So this is a really interesting topic to me, and I've always been very interested in what the background of the athletes who attend my training events are. I really like to know what other sports they did, and if they're involved with art and music, and where they came from, because I think that it really shapes their path and their motives and their understanding and their intent for what they're doing. So my background was, I have a very diverse background, family background. My mother, Lucinda, is from the South Bronx. She was born into pretty extreme poverty and had kind of at that time, a traditional inner city Roman Catholic household. Went to schools where nuns swore in Polish and smacked people. and got pregnant with me to get out of the house. I'm her first child. That's what she did. And she had me when she was 19. And so I think having a young mother and her having a very difficult relationship, within which she also had my brother, forced her to make some difficult decisions at a young age. And she left my biological father. She snuck out with us, actually, because the relationship was so dysfunctional when I was 4. And my brother was 6 months old. My mother was only, I think, 22, 23 at the time. And I remember when I became that age feeling like, first of all, could I even be responsible for children? But second of all, would I be strong enough to make such a bold decision at that age? And she came out to Albuquerque to start a new life because her parents were out here. And luckily, I was raised in the Rockies. I was personally born in New Jersey, actually, during the time my mother was living on the East Coast. I was born in an Air Force hospital in Monmouth County in Oceanport. And I was actually born 1 minute before the Apollo 13 astronauts splashed down. And the Air Force doctor was apparently playing this television transmission in the delivery room.
Wow, history. Couldn't miss out on history.
While my mother was in labor. It's kind of a funny thing. And I'm a breech birth. I tried to come out head first, and they couldn't turn me. They finally just pulled me out sideways. I tried to come sideways. They turned around and pulled me out backwards. So I think this whole path in life may have started with coming out the wrong way in the first place, in my case, which leads to creativity and hardship. So I was fortunate enough to have been raised in, a lower population, natural environment with access to the outdoors here in New Mexico. Fortunately, my mother met my father, Steve Fairfield, who wound up adopting my brother and I when I was about 11. And he took us on as his own children. He has no biological children to speak of that we know. Now, he did serve in Vietnam, so we don't know, but we're pretty sure we're his only children. And he's an only child himself. And so my paternal adopted grandparents only had my brother and I as grandchildren. They only had adopted grandchildren.
Wow.
And yeah, it was interesting. My father was born in Hawaii and was raised in Carmel, California. my mother's family was lower educated, but had some cultural spice. My maternal grandfather was Irish, and my maternal grandmother was Spanish, and so Spanish was spoken in the house. So I had an early recollection out here in New Mexico that, other languages can be spoken at home. And my father's family was very diverse, mainly from the Santa Barbara to Carmel area. And my great-grandmother on my father's side was the first conscientious objector and vegetarian and human and animal rights activist I ever met. She lived in one of the first ashrams in the U.S. in the Santa Barbara area, way back, I think, in the 50s, before it was even got hijacked by the Transcendental Meditation movement.
Uh-huh.
And I had very interesting grandparents on that side of the family, my father's side, who I think helped shape my ideas as I got older and encountered personal difficulties with my life. They didn't shun me. They embraced all of my colorfulness, we'll say.
Awesome.
My mother is an investment advisor. She owns her own firm. She worked her way up in a man's world and kicked some butt, and I have a lot of respect for that. I remember her working 3 jobs when I was younger. She had very low education, and I watched her do the whole thing.
Wow.
She earns much more money now, and even after I was age 40, than she ever did growing up. So I didn't grow up with that. I watched her build her wealth, so I don't take it for granted. My father is a very intelligent attorney. He's a senior partner in his law firm. Not a litigator. He's more of a preventative law kind of guy, transactional attorney. And I saw him do a lot of really good things for people. I saw he helped people gain citizenship. He helped people who had been treated unfairly by racial prejudice. He set a good example for us to be equitable people and to be fair. And so I had those 2 influences. I had the West Coast influence, the East Coast influence, and then I had the desert and the mountains in the middle where my brother Tom and I were raised. So I think that creates some perspective and some balance.
Yeah, I could imagine. So what kind of sports did you end up playing as a child? What was your first sport?
Well, I guess the first sport was horsing around and wrestling with my father and my uncle, and my mom was very protective of us because of our, she'd rescued us and transported us out here. So I wouldn't say that either of my parents were particularly athletic at a high level. My father grew up playing sports, not so much my mother. Our first sport that we got into that was kind of formal was skiing, actually. My parents got a little cabin outside of Taos Ski Valley back in the day. And my brother and I learned how to ski out in front of the cabin on the hill, little toy skis. And then we went into the ski school, and that was better than a driver's license. You had the whole mountain. Once you knew how to shred, you could go everywhere. It's freedom. And then I got a lot, into bump skiing and tree skiing. It was Taos, so we were into that style. And then I got into ski racing. Ski racing was really my first sport that I got into. And all the while I was playing soccer, actually, in elementary school. And I went to Monte Vista Elementary School in Albuquerque. And I also had tried rock climbing because my mother's brother, Raymond Holland, I guess that was my first sporting experience. Was, if I rewind a little bit, he had snuck me and my brother out when I was probably about 5, and my brother, I guess, was about a year and a half. He was little, and he brought us to a little frozen waterfall in the foothills of the Sandias, and we planned the expedition. We had to get out and back before Mom came home because he was, quote, babysitting us, and he drug us up this little frozen waterfall with 20, 30 feet of Perlon cord, and we weren't really climbing. He was just pulling us up, and I just remember it being a really cool thing to prepare for an expedition, not knowing where I'm going, get all the gear ready, and then go do it and come back and sneak out and do it. And that kind of set the tone for my climbing, because back then there were no climbing gyms. Nobody wanted their kids climbing. Climbing was dangerous. It was perceived as pretty renegade and unpredictable, but my uncle had planted that seed at a very young age. And then fast forward to middle school, and he started taking me into the outdoors, taught me about outdoorsmanship, hiking, camping, really everything, and climbing was just part of it. And so while these other sports were going on in my life, climbing was coming in, and climbing was kind of the outlet. It was like the independent outlet that I had. It was the freedom from all the other structure. It was mine. It was not the family sport. So it started to take on a significance, but I think that the other sports were very key to me because skiing gave me a sense of freedom, and it gave me a sense of like a driver's license. I had a season pass. I could do what I wanted, and I could explore, and there was consequence. And it was a family sport, but then it became, it wasn't long before my brother and I were skiing better than our parents because they put all their money into us going to ski school instead of them. So,
yeah.
It became a social thing. You ski with younger people, older people. Meanwhile, I was playing soccer every day at recess, and we'd keep track from day to day. We'd play 3 recesses deep and keep the match going. And we're playing with older kids and younger kids and 9v13 and all that, and getting into little skirmishes. And, so my parents thought, well, maybe you should go join an AYSO team. So I went and did that. And within 2 practices, the coach said, you're not good on this team. I was pushing and shoving, and it was not fun for the other kids. I didn't have the skill, but I had the intent that this was serious. And so I think one of the key moments to me developing my attitude as an athlete was when that coach referred me to try out for Carlisle Thistle, which at the time was run by Craig Robertson, who became the head coach at UNM. And when I went to the tryout, my mother especially didn't want me in basketball or baseball or football. Not that I'm built for it. There's no risk there. No interest in it, no risk of it. Not going to happen. But she wanted me in a safe sport. So, soccer was a girl's sport back then. So, there I go into soccer, and then I show up for this tryout. I don't know anybody else on the team. And Craig Robertson is Scottish, has a strong brogue. He's pretty blue-collar style coach, even though he had a PhD in chemistry. And was pretty stern. Like, I was pretty intimidated. And he wanted me to try to get the ball from him. He wanted me to keep the ball from him, and he kind of put me on the spot in front of everybody, and he was pushing me and shoving me and playing real aggressively, and I started to yelp back at him, and I remember him saying, what are you going to do about it? And he started grabbing me, and I started elbowing him, and he angered me so much that I started using foul language. And he's like, that's that's football. That's how you play football. This isn't soccer. We play football. And Craig was like the first person I'd met as a child who wasn't related to me, who was an adult, who showed me passion and consequence just from day one. And it really resonated with me as an athlete and as a person. That my parents didn't really understand the rules of soccer, right? So they kind of stayed out of it. And so my brother and I were raised to go do our things and take ownership over them, even if my parents didn't understand them. They obviously wanted it to be a healthy environment, but they really seemed to respect us having diverse experiences and influences from other adults, many of whom they didn't agree with or even understand, but they would let go of that control and just have trust in us to decipher things and define who we are. So I found that very powerful. All of my subsequent soccer coaches, except for my high school coach, were all foreign. I had an English coach. Dave Robertson became a coach at age 16. He's another Scottish coach. Had an English coach, had a Greek coach, had a Brazilian coach. And then my ski coaches were kind of crazy guys who traveled the world. And so I viewed sports as cultural exchange. I viewed my sports were about international activities. My sports were dominated by people from other places. I grew up watching World Cups and Euros wherever I could catch them, usually on Univision in Spanish, and having to root for people from other countries, people of other ethnicities, other people who spoke other languages. So I think that set the stage for me to athletically to be thinking about sports outside of the U.S. and outside of my culture, because at that time soccer still was something. It was right after Pele had done his thing here. So I was a fan of the sport, fan of foreign sports, fan of foreign athletes. And then my brother was a gymnast. My father became an international men's gymnastics judge, an NCAA gymnastics judge. So a lot of our role models in that sport were Russian, Romanian, Japanese, Chinese. So very early on, I was having international influence in my life through sports. And I think that's a key. It's key to developing as an individual, but it's also key to understanding maybe what your options are out there, not just playing baseball because it's the only thing going on down the street, you know? So it kind of set the tone for what would drive me forward in my career, unbeknownst to me at that time, that I would seek a foreign language experience. I'd seek travel experience. I would seek cultural exchange. I was very not only comfortable with that, but somewhere inside of me, that's what I wanted, because I was not an exemplary student by any means. I went to public school. My parents did not think that we deserved to go to private school unless we really wanted it and we were willing to work for it. My father's, I can remember him saying on numerous occasions that I wasn't worth the investment, and he was right. My parents were very frank with us. They weren't afraid to provide opportunity, but they didn't want to inflate us or blow hot air. They were really astute to what we were responding to. And myself, probably more so than my younger brother, I was much more rebellious, even at a young age, much more questioning of authority. I was really searching for a way to define myself. And so, that can lead to some issues along in everything that you do when you're in a society that demands conformity and you're at an age that requires it. So meeting older adults from other cultures that had passion really seemed like the gateway. Like these guys live with meaning. There's something to this. I definitely was the kind of person who was prone to get angry and tear up a math book in elementary school, but my parents were the type of parents who would tell me I needed to go bring it to the principal and own my actions and figure out a plan to pay for it. So I was not raised with this sense of, hey, I'm anything great and I'm special and I'm gifted, and there was none of that. Early on in my parenting, we were required to be on the level and look someone in the eye and shake their hand, even as very little kids, and speak for ourselves and speak our minds. We were not raised on the Bible. We were not raised on any other kind of media ipecac. Our parents really encouraged us to challenge the information that was coming at us in the news, to challenge propaganda in our society. I was sent to Mexico, to Cuernavaca for a summer when I was in between 8th and 9th grade, to stay with a family and study Spanish. They really wanted to impart upon us the importance of respecting other people, other cultures, other languages, and learning about them first, not just prejudging. My grandparents, particularly my grandmother, was the first real environmentalist I met. She brought me to my first concert, a reggae concert. She educated me about jazz music and blues, African American history. She educated me about Cesar Chavez and labor struggles at a very young age. I mean, these are conversations that I was hearing. I didn't fully understand them, but these were concepts that were being discussed. My parents, and especially my grandparents, had very diverse friends of all sexual orientations, races, and religions. My father had Japanese clients who spoke barely any English. We learned a lot from them. So I was just raised in luckily, an environment with parents who wanted to cut through a lot of the segregation and thinking and between people and culture, even though we were in Albuquerque. And I think that, along with these passionate adults who were involved with these sports that I was pursuing, really set the stage for me wanting to seek something else, seek something different that really exemplified who I am, at least the person I was trying to discover. And my grandmother gave me a lot of books at a young age, books I was too young to understand, a lot of books on Eastern philosophy, existentialism, a lot of the classics, Catcher in the Rye, Brave New World, Lord of the Flies. She wanted me to question authority, especially not being a great student in school. Her philosophy was, it's okay, but you do need to educate yourself. If you're going to be rebellious and against something, you need to know what you stand for and you need to know why. My parents were definitely more concerned, I think, about my tendencies or my desire to drop out of high school even. I mean, I want to just take a GED test and get out. And my father told me, no, you're not going to do that. You need to finish this. This is about socialization. This is not just about education. It's not academic. I think my parents placed a high value on experiential learning and travel, especially when they saw that I was not on student council. I'm not on the homecoming court. I'm not that guy. I'm not. I had a mohawk. I was listening to punk rock. I was not the kind of kid who was going to make everybody proud in the short term. And I was happy with that. I was perfectly fine defining myself that way. And I went to school at a district. So I had friends from other schools. My parents gave me a driver's license as young at 14 years, 8 months, which was way too young. I took some adventures with a car and had my license removed by my parents. I definitely was testing boundaries, but they would always give me the benefit of the doubt and give me the opportunity to make a choice as to whether I was going to make a mistake and let me decide how to fix it, to be responsible for my own actions. So I think that's something that I've seen change in parenting, even amongst people my age and a lot of people younger than me. I think it has shaped how people are enabled in the world and how they expect athletic performance or academic performance or status or anything else. They're more result status driven than process driven, perhaps, as a result of that. So we weren't raised like that. That isn't to say we didn't make mistakes, but we were raised to to experiment and then deal with the consequences and own up to them.
Wow.
Yes. It's a little non-traditional there.
Yeah, for sure. And, one thing that popped into my head is that parents who have children who are like to defy authority, as you put it, a lot of them want to try and counter that personality with gaining control over the child and trying to get them to conform. But it doesn't sound like your parents necessarily did that for you.
I mean, at times they had to step in, right? Like, they had to discipline us, for me especially. They did step in, but they were trying to let me find it. And I think they knew I wasn't going to follow the conventional means, but I was expected to come up with an alternative plan and shape it myself, which is hard to do because it's easy to say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do the other thing. It's much more difficult to visualize what you should be doing and apply yourself and create your own structure. And so that's what I did in high school. I was fortunate enough to have had a superintendent for APS who had been the principal of Sandia High School. And he allowed me to structure my own school schedule. So I wasn't homeschooled, but I was able to get travel credit. I'd done a couple of trips in the summer, and I had done some writing, and I got credit. So instead of me taking more classes in AP, I was taking fewer classes, trying to get more time off to train during the day, to go rock climb. And he allowed me to set my own schedule, so I only took 3 classes in the morning as a senior in high school, and I did a lot of that as a junior as well. And I went to night school at UNM, so I was interacting with older people, and my parents thought that was good. So I had a plan when I started creating my own training schedule, if you will, for climbing. And all along the way, that was somewhat conflicting with my soccer and with my skiing. I mean, it was this dangerous cycle of me negotiating my way out of class when I'm 15 to go ski during the day, and then taking it a little too far and missing soccer practice. But although Craig Robertson offered me a scholarship to play for UNM when I was a junior, my parents always rolled with my coach's decision to bench me if I missed practice. They never stepped in, and they were more interested in the human development aspect of my participation, especially in a team sport, because I was fiercely independent. It was the only team sport I ever played. So they valued all of that. They never interceded, never told my coach how much I should play, where I should play, how I should play. It was always, they outsourced it, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they let who was supposed to tell you you're doing a good job tell you you're doing a good job or a bad job instead of forcing the coach to do it, or competing with the coach and saying, no, you need to be playing more. So that's great that they sided with the coach and held you accountable. Now, when did you said you went to, or you got a scholarship to play soccer at University of New Mexico. Did you take that scholarship and play over there?
No, I didn't. I actually didn't even play. It was an informal offer. Craig was scouting me. I was a junior, so I had to wait. And I wound up not playing varsity soccer my senior year because I had a bouldering accident between my junior and senior year of high school. When I went on a student trip, went to Europe, and I started climbing a lot. I actually departed from the student trip and traveled alone in Europe for a month. My parents let me do that right before I turned 17, and went and stayed with some friends in Denmark and went climbing in France. And then that's where I'd seen the first climbing walls I'd ever been on. I'd seen them in magazines, but I'd never been on any until I got over to Europe. And when I came back, I just wanted to climb, and I got injured bouldering, and I was climbing alone. It was pretty severe posterior dislocation in my right elbow.
So what can you tell the story of what happened?
Well, I was actually bouldering in the foothills just east of Albuquerque at a bouldering area called U-Mound, and I was attempting a problem that I had no business being on at the time, and I was alone. I didn't have a spotter. This was before we had crash pads, and it wound up being a boulder problem that I was not able to climb for. It was like another 11 years later until I become a professional climber. I was not able to complete this climb, and I had the first ascent of this route. No one had climbed it. And so I was in way over my head, no spotter, no pads, and I performed a left foot lock really high over my head, and my right foot slipped while I was crossing through with my arm overhead, and it flipped me upside down, and I had to stick my arm out to stop myself. Otherwise, I would have taken a sharp rock that was embedded in the ground on my neck. So I had a full posterior dislocation. My parents were definitely not happy about that because it was kind of like validating that climbing is dangerous to them, that I shouldn't be doing it. Even though they had invested in sending me to the International Alpine Academy in El Dorado Springs, Colorado when I was 15 to take formal lessons. They made sure I had good equipment. I had actually bought all my first climbing equipment. I had a paper route when I was 11 through 14, and I bought all my own climbing equipment, mail ordered it without their permission. They were very astounded at my resourcefulness to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, before the internet days.
Yeah, it was before, yeah, exactly. It's like good old-fashioned mail order. But the ownership of it just drew me. I had ownership of it, It was like I could take the bus to the end of the road and then go bouldering or go route climbing. I remember getting my brother out of middle school, and that was back when you could call in for your little brother and scam him out to get someone to belay you. Like literally, I'd pull him out of middle school to come climb with me because I needed a partner to belay me on a route. So it was fun. It's like what you hear about guys ditching school to go surf. But it wasn't funny to my parents. I was negotiating a lot, and so this just was a culmination of something that had gone wrong, and I shouldn't have been doing it. And luckily, my elbow was relocated without any soft tissue tear, and all was well. I got very lucky on the injury, considering the severity of it. And so I started climbing a lot, and I was injured. I was training with one arm. I was running. I was cross training. I was doing whatever I could, and I didn't play soccer. I didn't go out for tryouts for my senior year. But after I injured my arm, then I went out and I tried to get on the team. And the head coach, who had been the JV coach, he and I didn't really get along. I won't go into the details, but I didn't respect him. He knew it. I probably didn't really want to play for him anyway. He kind of did me a favor. He said, "Well, you can be a manager, but you missed tryouts, and you're not." And everyone else wanted me on the team. And I think he did the right thing. I didn't show up for tryouts, and it doesn't matter how good you are. It matters how committed you are. And he helped me make the right decision. I'm not going to sit around dishing out water to people. There's nothing against that, but that's not me. I'm going to climb. I'm done with soccer. I kept playing club, but I'm done. I'm going to climb. He helped me make that decision while I had an injury that prohibited me from climbing. So it was a very difficult period for me because my arm was in a sling. It was actually in a cast for a while. So then I went to Gold Cup Gymnastics, which is pretty mythic. My brother had been going there. He was a junior Olympic gymnast. And I sought sport-specific strength and conditioning training from Ed Birch, who was a very renowned men's coach in the 80s and through the early 90s. And he produced a lot of great gymnasts, a lot like the guys my age who I wound up training with, I wasn't a gymnast, but I was strength and conditioning with people like Cheney Humphrey, Lance Ringnold, Trent Demas, his older brother Ted Demas, Brandy Wood. These are all like junior Olympians and Olympians. Trent won a gold medal. So I was in that pool of young people, and that's where it got serious. That's where I was like, man, like soccer's was pretty intense with some of these foreigners. It gave me some passion. It helped me understand the gravity of things. You cry when you win, you cry when you lose, you feel everything you do. But man, when I got in there with some guys who were trying to make the Olympics who were 16, 17 years old, it really raised the bar for me. It really opened my eyes as to what was possible if you wanted to really focus yourself on training properly. It was a whole other level of systematic training, and it just a level. I mean, I saw this thing in Sports Illustrated last year where they named, and I know I digress. They named the top 50 athletes, and most of them were North American athletes, and Simone Biles was in there. But of course, the number one athlete in the world is a running back in the NFL. But I got to be honest with you, like if you were going to do that objectively, the top 40 would be gymnasts, and the next 10 would be track and field athletes. Probably there are so many great athletes in gymnastics. It's insane.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I can imagine that training with those gymnasts really took your rock climbing training to another level as well. What do you remember being the difference after you started working with those athletes?
Well, I went in with an injured arm that had to be rehabbed, and I could do very little of what they could do initially, and I couldn't even. I mean, obviously, I never worked on their routines. I'd break off after the warm up and stretching, and then I had my own climbing specific routine. But just watching the intensity of the coaching, watching the demands that would be the disciplinary action that'd be placed on everybody if somebody was out of line, including myself, just for being in the room. The intensity and the psychology and the 100% commitment to a low probability goal of making the Olympics by a lot of people it just helped me understand that if you want something, you're going to have to relinquish yourself to a process that's going to involve a labyrinth of learning and a tremendous amount of humility. Because I came in there as like a strong teenage climber who climbed with the college guys and the adults, who was this kid these guys thought would be really good, and I was stronger than a lot of the adults already in New Mexico. But in there, I was the weakest person when I got there. And so it made me realize what I could do. I saw other 16-year-olds doing incredible things, and obviously that's a late start for a gymnast, but I had the right muscle fiber type and I had the right mindset. So, I did that within 6 months of rehabbing my dislocated elbow. I did my first one-arm pull-up at age 16. I thought that was pretty amazing.
Wow.
That had never happened before I had the injury. But that was nothing in there. They all started to try to do it after me, and then some of them could do it. It was in their wheelhouse. Their focus, their intent, their ability to train 25, 30 hours a week at that age with no certainty, their ability to deal with injury, the polyvalence of the athletics and gymnastics is unreal. And that's why you see, traditionally the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese, they put the kids in gymnastics first, and then they pull them out at different ages depending on how their morphology is maturing, and they place them into the right sport for their build. But all of them have a gymnastic background, and I think it would help goalkeepers to have or really soccer players. You see them doing cartwheels now and backflips. I mean, they're gymnastic athletes. Mm-hmm. It could help anybody. Wide receivers. So I thought that was the right way to go, because I knew the Russians everyone was a gymnast by default until further notice, and you got pulled out for Olympic lifting or pole vaulting or whatever your sport, but that's the master cylinder. I feel like the master cylinders for sports are pretty much, the cornerstones are gymnastics, dance, and martial arts. Those three things, if you train in those three things for 10 years, even if you're a late starter in another sport, you'll be way more coachable, and you'll be way further ahead than everybody else within the first couple of years of participation in the sport.
Wow.
I had wanted to be a gymnast early on. When I think I was already in middle school. I had a friend who was a gymnast, but my brother was looking for something to do, and my parents didn't want us to be competitive with each other because we're boys, but we're 3.5 years apart, so just by virtue of the age difference, I would usually be better than my brother, but not because I was more talented in something. So it kind of became his thing. And then I came back to it, but with the intention of training for climbing. And that was incredibly beneficial. Once again, an incredibly passionate adult having influence on me and expecting me to take responsibility for my actions and to watch and learn from those around me. And then when I wound up going to college, I chose my university not based on where I should have been going for academics. I tested really well on the ACT and SAT. I'm one of those people that test in the top 5%, but I'm an average 2.7 student. My intention is clear. I was trying to get out and rock climb. So I was at CSU in Fort Collins, and I went there specifically to climb. I had climbing objectives, and I wound up getting into ballet. And then 2 more years of ballet training, huge influence on my climbing. You can still see it in my movement, just 2 years. It's such valuable training. So learning these little things along the way, just from different people and being encouraged to travel, and then using these tastes of different sports even that could meld into something that I made my own. And it seems random, but they all influence the social and the psychological factors, and then the sports science factors. They all work together, even if you bring them in from seemingly non-related activities, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. So, one thing that struck me was when your mom and your dad said when you injured your elbow like you did, that reaffirmed for them that rock climbing was dangerous, but they still supported you. So did they ever try and talk you out of rock climbing when you were younger?
I think early on they were very apprehensive because they didn't understand it, because they're not outdoors types. My father in later years has become more that way. My father grew up playing traditional sports, in the 50s, and then, that's just what you did. And who knew what rock climbing was then anyway? So, but I didn't have the kind of parents who were out trying to do their first marathon or complete the Ironman. Everyone thinks when they see how athletic I am, even at my age now, they think I must have these parents who are professional athletes, and not at all. So I think that it was based on their fear of they had a lack of understanding of the sport, and all of us did, because we didn't really know where it was going. It was further ahead in Europe, so I had that image in my mind from these French magazines that I couldn't understand. I could just look at the photos. But they didn't really understand that it wasn't just a socially deviant, maverick, renegade, asocial activity for misanthropes. It was actually it was becoming a real sport, and it happened to suit me physiologically and psychologically and emotionally. It corresponded really well with who I was as a person. It has a huge creative aspect. So I think they knew, because of the creative drive and the fact that it was bringing me in the outdoors, I was having meaningful experiences in the outdoors. My uncle having introduced me to outdoor education and self-reliance, it seemed to be helping me with my behavior, and it was giving me a sense of identity and confidence as a person. It seemed to correspond with going outside and reading philosophy and meditating and exploring ideas and having physical engagement, like martial arts. So I think they saw the value, and they didn't really try to talk me out of it, but they were very apprehensive. I don't think they were as apprehensive and afraid as the way I would be driving sometimes in cars and the sneaking out of school and dating older girls. And there was a whole host of other things going on that were probably higher risk, but because those are known, they seemed less dangerous than the rock climbing,
I could imagine
the rock climbing was something that kept me in line, if you will. It was self-imposed. It was like my self-regulation,
All right. Thanks for listening to part 1. And I hope you move on to part 2, where Timy speaks a little bit more about the specifics of rock climbing and also answers his lightning round questions as well. Enjoy.